Seattle glittered that night. The skyline shimmered across Puget Sound, and inside the Fairmont's Grand Ballroom, everything smelled like old money and polished glass. The Hale Foundation Gala was the event of the season. Vintage jazz humming in the background, champagne towers catching the chandelier light, and 100 powerful people pretending their smiles were real. At the center of it all stood Victor Hale, the man everyone called Seattle's golden attorney. 58, sharp as a blade, voice smooth as silk, Victor had built his empire on charm and calculation. 10 years ago, he'd lost his first wife, Nora West, in a tragic boating accident off the Washington coast. The papers called it a heartbreaking maritime mishap. His eulogy had drawn tears. His composure had drawn respect. And when the Coast Guard called off the search, Victor quietly called it what it really was, a clean break. Now he was remarried to Sienna, a young philanthropist who looked perfect beside him. His daughter Ava, now in medical school, adored him, or so she thought. From the outside, Victor's life was immaculate. Ocean View Mansion, smiling family portraits, foundation dinners, and not a shadow out of place. Until that night, he'd just taken the stage to deliver his annual speech, one hand resting casually on the podium, the other cradling a glass of Merlot. Tonight, he said, we celebrate compassion, resilience, and second chances. The crowd murmured their approval. He always knew the right words, the right pauses, the perfect mix of grief and gratitude. Then he saw her. At first, she was just a shape near the back of the ballroom, partially hidden by crystal light and motion. Something about her posture froze him. The way her head tilted, the silver streak through her hair. His throat went dry. When her face lifted toward the light, the glass nearly slipped from his hand. It was her. Older, yes. Weathered. But those eyes, green as sea glass, were the same eyes that had stared up at him from a storm-tossed deck a decade ago. Eyes that had disappeared under black water. Eyes he'd told himself he'd never see again. For a long, impossible second, the room shrank until it was only them, the orchestra fading to a hum, the laughter dissolving into static. She didn't move. She just looked at him. Then, with a slow, deliberate curve of her lips, she mouthed 5 words that made his heart seize. You buried me too early. The glass hit the floor. No one noticed. The music swelled. A waiter hurried by. A socialite whispered about donations. But Victor stood frozen, the blood draining from his face. When he blinked, she was gone, just vanished into the crowd like smoke. He stepped off the stage mid-speech, brushing past colleagues, ignoring their confused smiles. He searched the lobby, the corridors, even the ladies' cloakroom entrance. Nothing. No trace. The registration desk hadn't logged any woman by that description. By midnight, Victor's car was the only one left in the valet queue. He sat inside with trembling hands, staring at his reflection in the windshield. For the first time in 10 years, he felt something he couldn't cross-examine or outthink. Fear. When he got home, the house was dark. Sienna was asleep upstairs. Victor went to his study, poured another drink, and tried to steady his breathing. Then he saw it, a small padded envelope inside the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a cork, a single, faded wine cork, from a 2007 bottle of Napa Cabernet. He recognized the logo instantly. That was the night he'd proposed to Nora. He'd promised her forever. Taped to the cork was a note written in a hand he hadn't seen since that night on the Scarlet Ember. Still remember the night you proposed. I kept the cork. Thought you might want it back. Victor dropped it onto the desk, as if it might burn him. His pulse thundered in his ears. There was no mistake. The handwriting, the looping are in her name, the ink she always used, deep navy blue. She's dead, he whispered to no one. She's dead. But when he looked down at that cork again, at the words that only Nora could have written, his throat closed. Because somewhere, buried under the fear, he knew the truth. He hadn't buried her deep enough. It had started like an apology. A weekend away. Just the two of them. That's what Victor Hale had promised when he handed Nora the yacht brochure. The Scarlet Ember. It said 42 feet of white fiberglass and polished teak, the kind of vessel that made people forget arguments and remember anniversaries. Nora had stared at the page, silent for a moment. Then she looked up at him and asked, "Why now?" Victor smiled, the same smooth, courtroom smile that had won over judges and juries for decades. "Because we need it," he said. "Because I miss you." But the truth was uglier. He didn't miss her. He feared her. 2 weeks earlier, Nora had found the files. Offshore accounts, fake settlements, shell companies tied to Victor's most powerful clients. She'd spent nights piecing it together while he was at conferences. And when she finally confronted him in their kitchen, her voice didn't shake. "You've been laundering money through veterans' charities," she'd said. "If you don't confess by Monday, I will." Victor remembered the way his chest tightened. He'd smiled then, too calm, patient, already calculating. "Let's not do anything you'll regret." She had laughed once, bitterly. "Regret is all that's left, Victor." That Friday, he rented the Scarlet Ember. He packed a cooler of seafood, 2 bottles of Cabernet, and the ring she had stopped wearing months ago. They drove to the marina in silence. The sky that morning was dull pewter, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. On board, Victor played the part of a man trying to heal a marriage. He poured her wine, made small talk, even asked about their daughter Ava. Nora answered politely, but her eyes stayed distant. When he suggested they anchor farther from shore, she hesitated. "The weather's turning," she said. "Maybe we should stay close." He smiled again. "Come on, counselor. You always said life's about taking risks." By sunset, they were miles from land. The air smelled of salt and electricity. Thunder grumbled over the horizon. Nora stood on the deck, her hair whipping in the wind, her arms crossed like armor. Victor walked up behind her, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Let's talk," he said softly. She didn't turn around. "You always want to talk when you're cornered." "I'm your husband," he said. "You stopped being that when you started lying to everyone you ever claimed to defend." The words cut sharper than the wind. He tried to hand her the glass. She didn't take it. She turned to go inside. "I'm done," she said. That was when he grabbed her wrist. It wasn't hard, not violent, just enough to stop her. But the deck was slick with rain, and when she pulled away, her foot slid. She caught the railing for half a second, eyes wide. For a single heartbeat, Victor could have reached for her, could have pulled her back. He didn't. He watched as her hand slipped, her body fell backward, and her scream vanished into the roar of the storm. The waves swallowed her whole. One flash of lightning, and she was gone. Victor stood there, the rain soaking his face, his pulse steady. No panic, no shout, no life ring, just the sound of the wind and his own breathing. When the storm rolled in heavier, he waited. Waited until the rain could wash the deck clean, until the guilt could hide behind reason. Then he went below deck, poured himself another glass of wine, and rehearsed the story he would tell. By dawn, he was back at the marina. His shirt was torn, his face pale, his hands trembling just enough to look real. He called the Coast Guard at 6:42 a.m. "My wife," he said, voice cracking perfectly. She fell. I tried to reach her, but the current. They searched for 3 days. No body, no life vest, no witnesses. The papers called it tragedy. Friends called it brave. And Victor Hale, the man who could turn lies into law, finally believed his own. Until 10 years later, when the woman he let drown came back wearing a new name and a colder smile. The sea should have taken her. That's what everyone believed, even Victor Hale. But the ocean, cold and merciless, sometimes spits back what men think it has swallowed. When Nora West hit the water, the shock tore the breath from her lungs. The waves crashed over her, black and endless. She tried to scream, but swallowed salt instead. Every stroke felt heavier, slower. Her wedding ring slipped off somewhere in the dark, disappearing into the same abyss that was supposed to claim her. Then she saw it, a splintered crate bobbing in the distance, a shard of wood from some forgotten wreck. She clung to it with what little strength she had left. Hours passed. The storm rolled on. Lightning flashed, thunder cracked, and through the haze of exhaustion, a faint yellow light flickered across the waves. A trawler. The fisherman who pulled her aboard later said she looked half dead, lips blue, skin gray, eyes open but seeing nothing. Didn't think she'd make it an hour, one of them recalled. They radioed the Coast Guard, but when asked her name, she whispered a lie that would save her life. Elise. Elise Monroe. No one questioned her. No one linked her to the wealthy attorney's wife who had tragically fallen from a yacht the night before. She was just another nameless survivor, another lost soul pulled from the Pacific. At the hospital in Port Angeles, she drifted in and out of consciousness. Nurses said she muttered the same word over and over, Hank, or maybe thank. No one was sure. When she finally woke days later, she claimed to remember nothing. No husband, no address, no past. The doctors called it trauma-induced amnesia. But Nora remembered everything. She remembered the look on Victor's face when he didn't reach for her. The calm, the quiet relief. The way he'd watched her sink like she was the problem being solved. For 3 weeks, she stayed silent, healing in body but unraveling in mind. She watched the rain streak the hospital window, wondering if her husband had cried for her. The TV above her bed gave her the answer. There he was, Victor Hale, featured on the local news, standing at a memorial service, holding their daughter's hand. His voice trembled as he spoke of losing the love of his life. The crowd applauded his strength. That was the moment Nora decided Elise Monroe would live and Nora West would stay dead. When the hospital discharged her, she took a bus east with nothing but a donated coat and the cash voucher from a social worker. She rented a basement room from an elderly widow who didn't ask questions. She got a job cleaning motel rooms. She spoke little, smiled rarely, and wrote often. Notebooks filled with memories of her marriage, of his crimes, of the night he killed her. Every entry began the same way. He thinks I'm gone. Let him. Years passed quietly. She moved from town to town, Spokane, Olympia, Portland, never staying long enough to be noticed. She worked night shifts and spent her days at the public library, teaching herself computers, banking systems, and digital records. The old woman who rented her a room thought she was learning for a job. In truth, she was learning how to disappear and how to hunt. By 2017, Elise knew more about cyber tracing than most small-town detectives. She learned how to scrub her digital trail, how to access property databases, how to track wire transfers hidden behind coded shell accounts. The storm that once tried to drown her had given her purpose. When she finally searched Victor's name online, what she saw didn't surprise her. Smiling photos, charity headlines, new wife, new mansion. The world had moved on. He had rebuilt his life on her grave. Elise printed his face from the news and taped it above her desk. Beneath it, she wrote 3 words, "He will see me." That was the night she stopped being a ghost running from the past and became a ghost who would make the past come knocking. By the spring of 2022, Victor Hale had everything a man could want: money, status, and a second life built on polished lies. But even the most careful man forgets to lock one door. And that was the one Elise Monroe, the woman once known as Nora West, decided to walk through. It started small, a whisper in the wires, a digital ghost haunting his perfect routine. The first email arrived on a Sunday morning, time-stamped 3:17 a.m. No sender, no subject line, just one attachment, a photo. It was Victor and Nora on the Scarlet Ember, the night before the storm. She was smiling, his arm around her shoulders. Below the image were 4 words typed in serif font. "You still remember the water?" Victor froze in his study chair. The email deleted itself within seconds. He tried to retrieve it. Nothing. His IT team blamed a phishing scam. His heart knew better. The next day, his desk phone rang once, then silence. The following evening, again. Always one ring. Always from an untraceable number. At first, Victor convinced himself it was coincidence. A prank, a rival, maybe an ex-client with a grudge. But the pattern grew. Every few nights. One ring, one message, one subtle knife cutting through the armor he'd spent 10 years forging. Then the voice came. On a Wednesday afternoon, as rain hammered the skylight, his office line buzzed. He hesitated, hand hovering over the receiver. When he finally picked up, the line crackled, and a woman's voice drifted through, low, calm, deliberate. "Do you remember what I was wearing that night, Victor?" His chest went tight. "Who is this?" You said blue made me look soft. But you always hated soft, didn't you? Click. The silence that followed was deafening. He replayed the sound in his mind. Her tone, her cadence, the slight rasp when she breathed. There was no doubt. It was her. That night, Victor couldn't sleep. He sat in the living room, whiskey glass untouched, watching the rain smear across the windows. The lights flickered once, then steadied. He poured another drink, trying to reason it out. Someone had to be behind this. A con artist, a hacker, someone using his past against him. But how could anyone mimic Nora's voice? How could anyone know the words she'd said moments before he'd pushed her into the sea? At 2:41 a.m., another message came. A photo, this time sent to his personal phone. It showed the dock where the Scarlet Ember had last been seen, the water black and still. Over it, in thin white text, "You forgot to look down." He dropped the phone. It buzzed again, another photo. This time of a woman at the Seattle waterfront, gray scarf, sharp cheekbones, eyes green as tidewater. Older, but unmistakable. The caption read, "I never drowned. You just stopped looking." Victor's blood ran cold. Across town, Ava, his daughter, was finishing her shift at the hospital when a woman approached the front desk. Late 50s, silver hair tucked neatly behind her ear, dressed in neutral colors. She asked for Dr. Ava Hale by name. When Ava came out, the woman smiled softly. "You've grown," she said. Ava frowned. "I'm sorry, have we met?" The woman didn't answer directly. She mentioned Ava's childhood toy duck named Ollie. The jellyfish she'd called Blue Magic. The lullaby with the raccoon. Every secret, every memory delivered in a calm, steady tone that made Ava's hands shake. Before Ava could ask another question, the woman said, "Tell your father I said hello. He'll know who I am." Then she turned and walked out into the rain. An hour later, Ava called her father in a panic. "Dad, something strange happened tonight," she said. "A woman came in. She knew everything about me. She looked just like Mom." Victor's pulse pounded. "That's not your mother," he said quickly. "Whoever she is, stay away from her." But when he hung up, his hand wouldn't stop shaking. Because deep down, he already knew the truth. She wasn't haunting him from beyond the grave. She was alive, and she was here. The rain had softened to a mist when Ava Hale stepped into the small cafe on Seattle's east side. The sign outside read Mariner's Rest, though the windows were fogged too thick to see in. She checked her phone again. The message had been simple. "If you want the truth, meet me here at noon." Ava wasn't sure why she'd come. Maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper. All she knew was that the woman who'd approached her at the hospital 3 nights earlier, gray scarf, calm voice, eyes too familiar to ignore, had left her shaken in a way nothing else ever had. She ordered black coffee, found a corner table, and waited. 10 minutes. Then 15. She was about to leave when the door opened and the woman walked in. She didn't rush. She moved like someone who had waited years for this moment and didn't need to hurry anymore. Her coat was damp, her hair streaked with silver, but her posture, straight, steady, was pure certainty. Ava's breath caught. She looked like her mother, not just in the face, but in the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, in the way her eyes scanned the room before locking onto Ava's. "Hi," the woman said quietly. Ava swallowed. "Hi, Elise, right?" The woman smiled faintly. "That's the name I've been using, but it's not the only one I've had." Ava frowned. "You said you knew my mom." The woman sat down across from her. "I didn't just know her," she said. "I was her." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the espresso machine filled the silence. Then Ava whispered, "That's impossible." "My mother," she drowned. Elise reached into her coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph. The edges were creased, faded from years of handling. It was Ava as a toddler, sitting in a sandbox, clutching a stuffed duck missing half its tail. "You named him Ollie," Elise said softly. "You cried for 3 hours when the stitching came loose. You said I'd hurt him." Ava's hands trembled as she took the photo. "How could you know that?" "Because I was there." Elise's voice cracked slightly, the first fracture in her composure. "I sang to you that night until you fell asleep. Rocky the Raccoon, remember? You hated that song." Ava blinked hard. The cafe blurred for a second. "If you really are her, why didn't you come back?" Elise looked down at her hands. Because if I did, he would have finished what he started. And I couldn't risk dragging you into it. You mean, Dad? She nodded slowly. Ava leaned back, her face pale. He told me you slipped, that it was an accident. Elise's eyes met hers, steady now. It wasn't. He waited, watched, didn't even call for help. The words landed heavy between them. For a moment, neither could breathe. Then Ava's voice broke. I don't know what to believe anymore. Believe what you see, Elise said gently. You're a doctor. You know how to tell life from death. Look at me, Ava. I'm alive. Because I fought to be. Ava's eyes filled. I used to dream about you, she said, almost to herself. Not big dreams, just little ones. You brushing my hair. You showing up at school on parent day. You singing that stupid raccoon song. She let out a small laugh that caught halfway to a sob. God, it was terrible. Elise smiled through her tears. Yeah, but it was ours. They sat there for a while, two women bound by blood and silence. The past hung heavy, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a ghost story. It felt like something unfinished that could still be written again. When the rain eased, Ava stood to leave. She hesitated, then said, Would you want to meet again? Elise nodded, voice barely above a whisper. More than anything. As the door closed behind Ava, Elise stayed seated, staring at the empty cup across from her. Her reflection in the window looked back, older, hardened, but alive. The ghost had finally met her daughter, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt something stronger than revenge. She felt human again. For years, Sienna Hale had believed her husband's quiet moments were the mark of a brilliant man. That was what everyone said about Victor, that he was intense, introspective, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. It wasn't until the silence began talking back that she realized something was deeply wrong. He had stopped sleeping. He wandered the house in his robe long after midnight, muttering to himself, sometimes whispering into empty rooms. At dinner, he barely ate. He stared through her like she was a shadow cast by another woman. At first, she blamed the stress, the firm, the press, the endless foundation events. But then came the boxes. They appeared one morning in the attic, 3 of them, old banker's boxes with faded handwriting. When she asked about them, Victor snapped. Those are work files. Don't touch them. His voice was too sharp, his hands too tight around the coffee mug. That night, after he left for a late meeting, Sienna climbed the attic stairs. The air smelled of dust and cedar. A single bulb flickered overhead. She opened the first box and froze. Inside were newspaper clippings, all about Nora West's disappearance. Dozens of them, some yellowed with age, others printed just months ago. Wife of prominent attorney lost at sea. Memorial service draws hundreds. Each article underlined, some circled, annotated with Victor's handwriting. The second box was worse. It held letters, handwritten, folded carefully, never mailed. Some were apologies. Others were love notes, all signed with the same name. Nora. The last box contained a flash drive, taped to the bottom of an old law brief. She pocketed it, heart hammering, and hurried downstairs. Sienna didn't sleep that night. When Victor came home at 2 a.m., she pretended to be asleep, listening to the sound of him pacing, muttering words she couldn't make out, something about the sea, the eyes, the water. The next morning, when he left again, she plugged the flash drive into her laptop. It took a few seconds to load. Then the screen filled with a grainy video clip. Victor sat alone in his study, shirt unbuttoned, glass of bourbon beside him. He didn't look like the man she knew. He looked broken, drunk, unraveling. The camera was hidden. She realized later that it must have been one of Nora's doing. The audio crackled. Then Victor's voice came through, slurred and shaking. She should have gone under faster. Damn cold water kept her floating. Should have made sure, should have tied something to her. Sienna clapped a hand over her mouth. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man on the screen wasn't grieving. He was confessing. By the time the video ended, tears had blurred her vision. She pulled the drive out, packed a small bag, and left the house before sunrise. At the downtown precinct, Detective Marcus Cole listened in silence as she told him everything. He didn't flinch when she handed him the flash drive. You did the right thing, Mrs. Hale, he said. "We've been waiting for this." "Waiting?" she asked. Cole sighed. "Let's just say someone's been feeding us breadcrumbs for months. Emails, photos, financial records. Whoever she is, she's smart. She's making sure he goes down the right way." Sienna's voice wavered. "She's alive, isn't she?" Cole didn't answer directly. "Alive enough to want justice." Back at the Hale residence, Victor felt the world closing in. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Anonymous numbers. Wondering calls. Silence. His email flooded with attachments he couldn't trace. Old financial files, scans of his forged signatures, even a still frame from a video. The outline of a woman on the deck of a yacht. He smashed his phone against the floor. Shattered his computer monitor with a paperweight. When the security cameras began to glitch, he yanked them from the walls. He was sure she was inside the system now, her ghost living in every wire, every whisper. Late that night, lightning flashed across Puget Sound. He stood at the window, staring out at the dark water beyond his house, and saw her. A figure standing on the lawn. Pale, still, rain pouring through her hair. The same blue dress. He blinked, and she was gone. Upstairs, the house creaked. His pulse pounded. He grabbed the gun from his drawer and whispered, "You're not real." But even he didn't believe it anymore. Because the woman he'd tried to bury was done haunting his memory. Now, she was haunting his life. The night the trap closed around Victor Hale, the sky above Seattle hung low and heavy. Rain clouds pressing against the glass towers like judgment waiting to fall. Inside his waterfront mansion, every light was off except the faint gold glow seeping from his study. For hours, Victor sat there, surrounded by half-empty bottles, torn papers, and the silence of a man unraveling. He hadn't spoken to Sienna since the night she walked out. He hadn't heard from Ava in a week. Even his firm had started temporarily distancing itself from him in the press. But none of that compared to the voice in his head. Her voice. Sometimes it was a whisper in the hallway. Other times, a full sentence that seemed to echo from nowhere. "You forgot to look down." He'd unplugged the phones, smashed the security system, even boarded up the windows facing the water. But the sound followed him, calm, unhurried, familiar. That evening, he lit the fireplace though it wasn't cold, poured a drink, and told himself it would stop. "She's dead," he said aloud. "She's not real." That was when the doorbell rang. Victor froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. The bell rang again, slow, deliberate, once, twice. He grabbed his pistol from the drawer and crept toward the door. Rain hissed against the windows. He hesitated, then pulled the door open. And there she was, Nora, or what was left of her. Her hair was silver now, her face older, marked with years that the sea hadn't washed away. But her eyes, green and alive, were the same ones he remembered, the ones that had stared up from the stormy water as she slipped beneath the waves. "You look tired," she said quietly. Victor stumbled backward, gripping the gun with shaking hands. "You're not real." She took one step inside, uninvited but certain. "Tell that to your daughter," she said. "Tell that to your bank accounts. Tell that to your conscience." "Stay back," he shouted. You're not her." Her voice didn't rise. "Then why do you still hear me at night?" The thunder cracked overhead. Victor's knuckles whitened on the pistol. "You don't get to come here and play games," he said. "You want a justice? Fine. You're looking at it." He raised the gun. His hands trembled, sweat beading at his temples. "You think you can ruin me? I built everything. You were nothing without me." Nora looked at him calmly. "You built everything on a lie." He took a step closer, breathing hard, veins bulging at his neck. "You want the truth? Here's the truth. Justice is what a man makes for himself." He cocked the gun and pressed the barrel to his temple. "You want to watch me pay? Is that what you want?" She didn't flinch. "No," she said softly. "I just want you to face it." Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Victor blinked, confused, then looked down at the gun. The magazine was gone. And then, suddenly, the lights in the room blazed on. From behind the curtains, tiny red dots flickered to life, camera lenses, recording indicators. They were everywhere, tucked into the vents, the bookshelf, even the smoke detector. A deep voice echoed from the hallway. "Drop the weapon, Mr. Hale." Victor turned toward the sound. Detective Marcus Cole stepped forward, badge raised, flanked by 2 officers. "What is this?" Victor barked. "You can't just—" Cole cut him off. "We can. You've been under surveillance for the last 2 weeks. Every word, every breakdown, every confession on record." Victor looked at Nora, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You did this." She nodded once. "You buried me once, Victor, but you can't bury the truth." The officers moved in, disarming him. He didn't fight. His body seemed to deflate, like a man who had finally realized the performance was over. Cole read him his rights as the cameras continued rolling. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Nora West, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice." Outside, reporters and police lights painted the rain in streaks of red and blue. Neighbors gathered behind gates, whispering. The great Victor Hale, the man who had once commanded every room he entered, was dragged out in handcuffs, head bowed, drenched in rain and shame. Nora stood in the doorway, unmoving. Her face didn't show triumph, only quiet, exhausted relief. As Cole passed her, he paused. "You sure you don't want to make a statement?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "The cameras have already said enough." He nodded and walked Victor to the cruiser. When the door slammed, thunder rolled again over Puget Sound. Nora stepped outside. The wind carried the salt of the sea, the same sea that had nearly taken her life. For a moment, she thought she saw the scarlet ember in the distance, its ghostly outline fading into mist. She could almost hear Victor's voice again, calm and rehearsed, saying it was an accident. But now, for the first time, she didn't feel fear. She closed her eyes and whispered into the rain. "You can't rewrite the tide." Behind her, the mansion glowed with police flashlights, its grandeur stripped bare. Ahead of her, the city lights glimmered across the water, cold, real, and alive. 10 years ago, Victor Hale had thrown her to the sea to silence her. Tonight, the sea had given her back her voice. The courthouse on 4th Avenue hadn't seen a crowd like that in years. Cameras lined the steps, reporters jostled for space, and satellite vans parked bumper to bumper. Headlines called it the resurrection trial, the case of the dead woman who walked back into her own murder investigation. Inside courtroom 2B, Victor Hale sat at the defense table, thinner than the man the city once idolized. His once slick hair had gone gray at the temples, his jaw tight but trembling. His hands were cuffed loosely in front of him, but the way he kept rubbing his thumbs together betrayed a man losing his grip on the illusion of control. Across the aisle sat Nora West, alive, composed, no longer hiding behind the alias Elise Monroe. For the first time in 12 years, she faced the man who had watched her drown. When she took the witness stand, the room fell silent. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Her voice was steady. "In September of 2012, I confronted my husband, Victor Hale, about financial crimes I discovered in his firm. He invited me on a weekend trip to reconcile. Instead, he pushed me from the deck of the Scarlet Ember and left me to die." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Hannah Ruiz, nodded for her to continue. "I survived," Nora said softly. "Barely. I spent weeks in recovery, years in hiding. I built a new life, learned how to find the proof he thought the sea had erased. I came back not to destroy him, but to make him face what he did." When the footage from the yacht's recovered hard drive played, grainy shadows, lightning flashes, the silhouette of Victor's arm reaching out, the moment she fell, you could hear the audience hold its breath. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. The implication was clear. Victor's attorney tried to spin it. "My client suffered emotional distress following his wife's death," he argued. "He was intoxicated, unstable. This footage doesn't prove intent." But then came Detective Marcus Cole, presenting the recordings from the hidden cameras in Victor's mansion. Every rant, every drunken confession, every mention of the cold water keeping her afloat. When the video ended, the jury looked at Victor differently. Not as a grieving widower, but as a man who'd been playing God and finally met someone who refused to stay buried. The defense called Victor to testify on his own behalf. It was a mistake. He stood, adjusting his suit as if the act alone could restore his old authority. "You want me to say I'm sorry," he began. "You want me to say I'm a monster. But that's not what happened." She slipped. I froze. I've lived with that guilt every day. He looked toward the jury, then at Nora. "She was unstable," he said. "Obsessive. She didn't understand the pressure I was under." Nora didn't flinch. When the prosecutor asked for rebuttal, she rose from her chair. She didn't walk to the podium. She walked toward him. "You say I was unstable," she said quietly. "But I was the one holding our marriage together. You say I slipped, but I remember the way you looked at me before you let go. You didn't panic. You calculated." The words landed like thunder. Victor's jaw tightened, his face pale. The judge turned to the jury. "You have heard enough evidence to determine intent," he said gravely. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Victor James Hale, guilty on all counts: attempted murder, obstruction of justice, and financial fraud." The gavel struck once. Victor didn't look shocked. If anything, he looked relieved. His last performance was over. As marshals led him out, he glanced back at Nora, eyes hollow. "You win," he murmured. She didn't respond. The trial made national headlines. But Nora refused interviews, talk shows, or documentaries. When a journalist shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" outside the courthouse, she simply said, "I feel alive." Weeks later, she stood at the counter of the Department of Vital Records with a folder in hand. Her birth certificate, hospital records, the court order confirming her legal identity. The clerk looked up, puzzled. "You sure you want this name back, ma'am?" Nora smiled faintly. "It's not for me. It's for the woman who disappeared. She deserves to be counted." She signed a form. Nora Elise West. Life after survival wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, messy, real. She moved back in her old apartment above the bookstore where she'd once lived as Elise. The furniture hadn't changed. The creaky floorboard near the window still moaned when she stepped on it. But she was different now, scarred, yes, but whole. Every Sunday, Ava came over. They didn't talk about the trial. They talked about books, about patience, about things that didn't hurt. Sometimes they just sat in silence. One afternoon, Ava brought a folded piece of paper, a crayon drawing from 2nd grade. A stick figure family, a house, a son, a dog. "I told my teacher I didn't have a mom," Ava said, her voice trembling. "But when I got home, I drew you anyway." Nora's eyes filled. "Even when the world forgets you," she said softly, "someone always remembers." Ava reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Don't stop coming back, okay?" Nora smiled through tears. "I won't." Months later, she received a letter with no return address. Inside was one page written in delicate handwriting. "Dear Nora, I watched your trial from a motel room in Des Moines. I cried through most of it, not because I knew you, but because you lived and I didn't." His name was Stephen. "He held me under the lake until I blacked out. I never told anyone. But watching you, I finally can. You weren't just fighting for yourself. You were fighting for all of us. Claire." Nora folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box beside her bed, next to Ava's drawing and a cork from a bottle of wine long ago. That night, she walked to the window and watched the city lights shimmer across Puget Sound. Somewhere out there, the scarlet ember had long since rusted away, swallowed by the same sea that once tried to keep her silent. She whispered to the dark water, "You didn't drown me. You remade me." And for the first time in 12 years, Nora West slept through the night without dreaming of the storm.